Inside of today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the best build for all 64 brawlers with inside of a game. I'll be doing timestamps to all the brawlers, so you don't have to worry about having to watch through the whole video. Without further ado, let's jump into it. First up, we have Shelly, so there's no doubt in my mind about the best build. Best gadget and star power by far going to be the shell shock and the clay pigeons. And then with gears, you only really need the speed gear. To be honest, you can get value out of all the other gears. I mostly go for damage just because of a combination with clay pigeons. It can be deadly at long range. Next up, we have Nita, so the best gadget is going to be fox fur 100% of the time. And then depending on game mode, you only really need to switch to hyper bear if it's heist. And then with gears, it really just depends on whether it's a grassy map or not. There's not really a gear that's really needed on Nita. Moving it on to Colt then. So with Colt, the best gadget by far is going to be silver bullet. I think the only scenario where I use the other gadget is on bridge too far. You don't really need to break open too many walls with the other gadget. And then up to you on the star powers. Most people do play Magnum special, but in some scenarios you might want to opt for the speed. It can really help you in dodging shots a lot easier. And then when it comes to the gears, then so for me the reload gear is definitely essential with Colt. And then again, depending on the map or scenario, I normally just go for damage, especially because you play Colt the most in heist. So with Bull, the best gadget by far is going to be Stomper. I used to use this gadget on heist, but 1500 HP, it's literally nothing. So Stomper 100% of the time. And then depending on what kind of ball playstyle you want to play, I would say Tough Guy is by far better even in heist, but maybe the odd scenario where they leave you on the safe berserker can be pretty good. And then with gears then, so I feel like on the grassy maps, of course, speed. On the non-grassy maps, you can get really good value out of the health and damage combination, but I've been trying the supercharge gear sometimes and it tends to work out more often than not. So with Brock, he has two really good gadgets. So with the rocket laces, you want to be using this when there's like an aggro brawler that you're facing off against, like a Fang for example, really good at getting away. And then rocket fuel's really good on maps that you can just destroy really quickly, like a backyard bowl for example. You're just going to be able to break up the map so easily. Reload speed is definitely needed as an epic gear. And then again, up to you depending on the map as such situation and whatever else, but damage more often than not, especially in heist. With El Primo's suplex supplement is definitely the better gadget overall, especially against tanks like Bibi. But for the odd scenario, maybe if you're facing off against like a Jacky or throw on Canal Grande where you need to open up the walls, this gadget can be pretty useful. I think El Fuego is a better star power because if you land it on top of an opponent, you will deal up to like 2500 damage, which is pretty nice. And then there's a lot of good gears for El Primo depending on the map and whatever else, but health gear can be really good because of his high HP, but most time I go for speed and damage. So with Barley, the best gadget for me is sticky syrup, just because a lot of times, even if it's not against tanks, you can quickly confirm kills with this gadget. And then with star powers, depending on the matchup, most time I go for extra nauseous, but if for example if I'm facing off against an enemy thrower, the medical use could be pretty good as well. And then for pretty much every single game, I use damage and shield. With Poco, he has two good star powers and gadgets, so for the most part 95% of the time you want to be using the first gadget. But with protective tunes, it's pretty useful on the hot zone, especially against crow slows, bee slows, or Otis's mutes. Pretty good in hot zone, as I said. The capo can be pretty useful in hot zone and keeping your teammates alive and staying on the zone, but most times screeching solo is going to be better, especially against those squishier characters. And then for the most part, unless it's a grassy map, I'll use a damage and shield, but speed can be good on those grassy maps. With Rosa, she has two really good gadgets depending on the map and the playstyle you want to play with her. Grow light is really good on gem grab maps, especially like Crystal Arcade. Creating a bunch of bushes in the middle makes it hard for enemies to real deal with your gem carrier. And then unfriendly bushes is really good on maps like Sneaky Fields, good at slowing and confirming kills. Plant life is by far the better star power, the other one is just terrible. And then with Rosa, you're only really going to play on grassy maps, so speed and damage is definitely the better combination. So with Jessie, she only really has one good gadget and star power. I think all of the time I'll use Spark Plug. Maybe the rare scenario in heist, I might switch out to Rico or Spring if we don't have much DPS on our team, but Spark Plug just really helps you with confirming kills. And then Energize 100% really good at wasting the enemy ammo. And then with gears and whatever else, I think all of them are pretty useful overall, just depends on the map you play. So with Dynamike, I think his build is pretty simple. Satchel Charge, by far the better gadget. Demolition, by far the better star power, especially since Dyna Jump has effectively been nerfed. And then unless it's a grassy map, then damage and shield will be the better combination. With Tick, it's pretty clear what the best gadget and star power is. Last hurrah 100% of the time, and then 99% of the time well oiled is going to be better. But in the rare scenario, I might actually switch out to this star power if the enemy don't have like a sprout or something or knockout. Then it can be really powerful to switch star powers. With gears, 100% of the time I use mythic gear and shield as well. I just feel like all the other gears are a bit overkill, especially especially the health gear. I think it's very overrated. With 8-bit, it's all depending on what game mode you're playing in terms of its build. So extra credit is going to be used in heist, and then other game modes, cheat cartridge is going to be really good, especially in gem grab, getting out and staying alive with the gems. I think most of the time boosted booster is actually the best star power. Maybe switch to plugged in when it's gem grab, because of course you need a little bit of extra speed to help you pick up those gems. And then with gears, reload speed 100% of the time. And then depends how you feel with 8-bit. Depends if you want a bit of extra speed. You know, health gear can have really good value and can damage, especially in heist. With Rico, it's pretty clear what the best build is for him. 100% of the time bouncy castle, and 100% of the time super bouncy. By far the best build for him. Robo retreat just doesn't really work out for him. You don't really want to stay low HP, especially when you combine it with bouncy castles. So next up is gears. Every single gear is actually really good with Rico, depending on what the matchup is and whether else. But for the most part, reload gear 100% of the time, and then it's literally up to you. The other 5 gears are really strong with it. With it, Darryl is very matchup dependent on which build to use. For the most part, I use recoil and rotator. Even outside of heist now, I've started to like this one a little bit more. It allows me just to get into the game much quicker. And then depending on the game mode, still hoops 95% of the time, but when it's heist, switch over to roll and reload sometimes, unless you're facing off against some Darryl counters, then I will stay with steel hoops. And then again, depending on the map, but for the most part, I will be using like damage and health. With Penny, really easy to define her best build. Salty Barrel 100% of the time, really good at taking out the tanks. And then Master Blaster, again, once you of course throw out your turret, the enemies can't really do anything, especially if those aggros. Does knock them back and deal some extra damage. Of course, you're not just going to throw it across the map at them, but it really helps just to defend yourself even more so against aggro. The other star power for me is just a little bit useless. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. And in terms of gears and whatever else, again, just depending on the map, but for the most part, damage and shield or speed should be your best friend. With Colt, it's pretty simple. Flying hook 100% of the time, one of the best gadgets inside of a game. And then protected pirouette most times. Maybe if you're playing on bounty or knockout, and then power throw might be a little bit better because it obviously takes you a lot longer to get your super. You won't be as aggressive with a Colt. And then all of the time, really, it depends what kind of Colt you are, but I go for health and damage most of the time, but you might want to opt for shield. It does help you out, especially with your super. With the Jacky, it's really plain and simple with her. The first gadget and the first star power is by far the better combination for her. Counter Crusher is really toxic for the enemies to deal with. And then in terms of best build, 100% really damage and speed. She really needs that extra little bit of speed and damage to get it in her gunfights. With Gus, he has a really overpowered build with his first gadget. The second gadget is useless. And then the same with his star power. The second star power is really strong. The first star power is not really the best either. In terms of his best gears, it just really depends on the matchup. I don't really go with the health gear too often with him. Normally, I'll just switch out the damage and speed and shield depending on the game mode. Bo, his build is pretty simple. Super totem pretty much all of the time. Maybe in Brawl you want to swap out to tripwire if you're really good at getting those clutch plays and destroying walls pretty effectively. And then snare bear is going to be the better star power. Maybe on some grassy maps, I've seen a few times it work out on like sneaky fields, for example, or double swoosh. Circle and eagle can actually be pretty underrated, but overall snare bear is going to be better. Reload speed gear all of the time, and then again depending on the map or scenario, but for the most part I use damage. So next up with M's, the best gadget by far is going to be friend zone. It really helps you defend yourself against tanks, but also confirm kills against pretty much any brawler. And then I use hype all of the time, but I see people get a good value out of bad karma. Just depends on how you play M's and what playstyle you have, but hype's really good, especially when you combine against multiple brawlers. It allows you to stay alive and makes it really hard to kill. And then for best gears, then pretty much all of the time I use speed and damage. So with Stu, both gadgets are actually really useful. It can depend on the matchup. A lot of the times you'll use speed zone on really defensive maps like backyard bowl or open zone, or just any kind of hot zone map, you'll use speed zone. But maybe if you need a wall break, especially on like dueling beetles against like a sprout, breakthrough could be a good underrated. And just overall, if you're playing a more aggressive Stu, this is going to be much better. Then in terms of style powers, I think 100% of the time Gaza Hill. There will be a few people in the comments say Zero Drag's underrated. I don't really like it myself. I like to just stay alive a lot easier with Gaza Heal. And then in terms of gears, I use damage and shield, but you can definitely get away with playing a few of the other gears. With Piper, both gadgets has its uses. In terms of if you're facing off against some aggro brawlers, then auto aim is going to be pretty good for you to confirm a kill, especially when you combine it with snappy sniping, because you actually get a bit of your ammo back if you hit that auto aimer. But homemade recipe is going to be really good at confirming kills, especially at max range on maps like Shooting Star. And then for me, snapping sniping 100% of the times. Whenever I switch off his star power, I just feel like Piper just capitulates so easily. And in terms of gears, there's only really 3 gears to use on Piper, and that's speed, damage, and shield. With Pam, it's really easy with her gadget and star power. Scrap Sucker 100% of the time, and Mama's Squeeze 100% of the time. There's zero debate about that one. And then in terms of gears, depending on whether you're on a grassy map or a normal map, you'll be switching between vision, damage, shield, health, well, literally all of them really, but for the most part, the strongest build should be the damage and the vision. With Frank, both gadgets definitely has its use. I think overall, if you're playing ladder, this gadget's definitely a little bit better, but if you're facing off against a lot of brawlers that cancel your super, this one's going to be really strong. In terms of star powers, I see pretty much every Frank use the sponge star power. Then in terms of your build them, so pretty much all of the time you're going to be using damage and health, but maybe if it's on a really grassy map, then speeds can still be pretty strong on the Frank. With Bibi, Shelly really has one good gadget, and that's definitely the gadget that gives you extra HP whilst taking damage yourself. It's a really good combination, especially with the batting stance star power. It allows you just to get closer to the enemies a lot easier because Bibi seems to get taken down too quickly. And then depending on the map and the situation, most time I'll be using like the damage and the health, but on grassy map, speed's really going to help you out. With B, it's really simple 100% of the times, zero debates. This is her best build. Honey Molasses 100% of the time, and then Honeycomb, every single pro player uses this star power. It's really strong on B, allowing her to stay alive and have a lot more threat with that 3k shot. And then it obviously depends on what map you play on. Most time I use damage and shield though, especially because of those 3ks. For turning into like 4k shots, it's pretty OP. So with Nani, she has 2 decent gadgets and star powers. It depends all on the game mode and matchup. Overall, you want to be using Return to Sender, especially on those passive game modes and maps like Bounty and Knockout. But using Warp Blast maybe on Brawl and Heist, especially Heist, trying to TP into the enemy spawn like on Safe Zone, for example, in that little pocket. And then in terms of star powers, it depends on whether you use the TP or not. If you use the TP gadget, then you want to be using Tempered Steel, and then vice versa. If you use Return to Sender, you want to be using Autofocus because of course you don't plan you plan on actually hitting your supers with this build. And then in terms of gears, 100% of the time, Supercharge is really going to help you cycle those Nani peeps a lot quicker. And then I use damage gear because if you have that damage gear, you can just deal so much damage with one shot, especially from far range. So next up we have Edgar, so just a terrible brawler all around. I don't think it really matters what build you use. This is the build I use for the most part, but hardcore is going to help you stay alive a little bit longer, especially against brawlers that may counter you. But you know, for example, if you're on pit stop and you know for sure you don't even need that extra shield against like a Rico and a Barley, and then Let's Fly is just going to allow you to just destroy them. And then it's dependent on how you really want to play with Edgar. To be honest, both star powers seem okay, but don't really help him out too much. Just depends on which one you want. And then in terms of gears, I use the Supercharge gear just to help me get my super a little bit quicker. It doesn't really help too much, but you know, Edgar needs all the help he needs. And then I go for shield because he's just so squishy. With Griff, there's only one gadget to use, and that's Piggy Bank. Really helps him destroy a lot of the walls on some maps. And Business Resilience, pretty much 99% of the times. Maybe if I'm facing off against a really tanky composition, then Keep the Change actually helps you out in that interaction. Then Reload Speed gear pretty much all of the time. And then I opt for normally like a damage or a health combination. With Grom, his gadgets really depend on what map you're actually playing on. Grassy maps, this gadget's really going to help you out, especially on maps like Center Stage. Will literally win you your lane, and everywhere else radio check can be actually really strong now since they've actually buffed his projectile speed. X Factor is by far the better star power, and then again depending on whether you're on a grassy map or not, but for the most part damage and shield will be your best friend. With Bonnie, it's pretty obvious what her best build is. Sugar Rush 100% of the time and Black Powder 100% of the time, zero debates about that. And then again depending on your matchup and scenario, speed, damage and shield are going to be the best gears. With Mortis, both gadgets are pretty good, but Survival Shovel is the gadget which pretty much all pros use. And then with star powers, Creepy Office is going to be better. Maybe in some wild scenario, Cord Snake can be decent, maybe like Dueling Beetles. I've seen it used a few times, but most time Creepy Office is going to be better. And then with his gears, damage and shield, it's going to be better unless it's a really grassy map and you want to get the upper hand with a speaker. With Tara, the best gadget by far is going to be Support from Beyond. It really helps you waste the enemy's ammo and then makes them easier to take down. And then next up, it really is dependent on the matchup or just how you feel with both star powers. Both of them are actually really good. For the most part, I'll be using Healing Shade, but for example, I'll definitely switch to Black Portal if I face off against like a Jean, or if I face off against like a Piper or another long range brawler that has a low reload speed. Black Portal can be really annoying against them. So in terms of gears as well, I will only probably be using Tara on a grassy map, so speed and damage are a better combination. With Jean, it's pretty simple. Lamp Blowout is going to be better everywhere except for the long range maps like Shooting Star. Vengeful Spirits might actually be a little bit underrated there. And then in 3v3 modes, Magic Puffs 100% of the time, and only in solo modes you want to be switching Star Power. In terms of gears then, for me, Vision Gear and the Mythic Gear are by far the better gears for him. With Max, it's really simple. With the gadget, Phase Shifter is 100% used all of the time. Then Supercharge is by far the better Star Power. Maybe if you're facing against a lot of tanks, 2 or 3 tanks, I'll switch Star Power, but Supercharge will 100% help you out, especially because you play Max more so as a mid. Then in terms of gears, it can be really up to you. All of the gears are really good with Max, but for the most part, I'll play damage and health. With Mr.P, both gadgets and star powers don't really help him out too much, but if you're talking about the best, Service Bell is probably a little bit better than the other one. And in terms of star powers, Revolving Door is going to be better than the first one, but don't really help him out too much in terms of his gears, damage, and shield pretty much all of the time. With gadgets, it's pretty easy. With Sprout, Transplant is going to be by far the better gadget. Going to be really annoying to deal with, especially having walls constantly with that gadget. Then Overgrowth is going to be the better star power for me, just because it gives you that extra range every 5 seconds, really helps him out. And then Supercharge is 100% the best gear for him. It allows you to get your walls in 4 shots instead of 5, and then depending on the matchup, either damage gear or the shield gear. Byron, his build is pretty simple. Booster shots all of the time, and same with melees. Going to allow you to hit shots really easy with his gadget, build up your super, and then in turn just constantly cycling that super. And then melee is going to be a lot better, well, literally everywhere in every scenario, because it's going to be really annoying for the enemies to deal with and automatically regen. And then damage and shield is going to be by far the better combination. With Squeak, it's really easy. Residue 100% of the time, one of the best gadgets in the game, and Squeak literally completely dependent on that gadget. And then with star powers, I don't think this star power is really necessary all of the time, but Super Stick is going to be the little bit of a better one, especially if you connect one. It's going to slow them down for 4 seconds, and then for the most part, damage and shield is going to be the better combination. Lastly, for the mythics, we have Gray. So Gray's best gadget is going to be Walking Cane. It really allows you to break open the map upon demand, and also gives you a little bit of extra damage, especially for example, if they're like 3,500 HP, you can pop a gadget onto them, hit them, and then just finish them off with one quick shot, whereas you can't do that with the other gadget. And New Perspective is going to be the better star power by far. Gives you additional 1,000 health every single time you go for a teleport, you and your allies. I think that's really good. And then next up, in terms of gears, pretty much all of them are good, probably except for the health gear. Next up, we have Spike. So Spike's best gadget by far is going to be Life Plant, maybe except for Heist in a few scenarios, but most of the time Life Plant's really going to help you out in those 1v1s. And then Curveball pretty much every single time. Fertilize can be okay on some maps, but still doesn't offer enough healing for it to be worthwhile in my opinion. And then for me, the best combination has to be Mythic Gear 100% of the time, and maybe depending on how you feel. All of these gears are really good except for health, but I like Vision, especially on those grassy maps. With Crow, it's pretty simple. Slowing Toxin is going to be by far the better gadget, and then Extra Toxic is going to be by far the better star power. Then in terms of builds, if you're on a grassy map, Speed Gear is going to be insane on Crow, and then maybe you want to switch it up if you're not on a grassy map. But the Mythic Gear, I don't think it's really necessary, but I just think you get value all of the time out of it, so I have it 100% of the time. With Leon, it's pretty simple. Lollipop Drops really going to allow you and your teammates to stay hidden and be unpredictable. Invisiheal is going to be by far the better star power as well. Maybe on Shooting Star you might use Smoke Trails, but everywhere else Invisiheal is going to be by far the better one. Mythic Gear is going to be really good because you're basically guaranteed value all the time with your super. An extra second might be the clutch factor, and then depending on a grassy map or not, switch up the gears. With Sandy, pretty simple. Sweet Dreams 100% of the time. Rude Sands pretty much 100% of the times, especially on grassy maps. It allows you to see people when they're inside of a bush. And then next up, damage and speed are pretty much the best gears all of the time. With Amber, her build is pretty simple. 5-star is 100% of the time. Wild Flames 100% of the time. That's because the synergy between these two is just really good, because you can pop a gadget, start a little bit of oil, and then in combination with his sub power, it allows you to cycle your super pretty well. And then in terms of gears, Reload Gear 100% of the time, really going to allow you to just stay in a fight a lot longer. And then damage gear as well. With Meg, a really easy build as well. Jolting Volts 100% of the time, and then Force Field, the other gadget and star power pretty much useless. And then in terms of gears, damage gear and the shield gear are going to be by far the better choices. So moving on to the final legendary brawler, we have Chester. So with gadgets, both gadgets are pretty useful. For the most part, I actually like Spicy Dice, just because it allows you to maybe switch off a really bad super, like I don't even know what it's called, the one that's like a mini lose super. It's pretty terrible, so when I switch off that for the most part, so that gadget helps out. Belle Mania, 100% of the time, it's literally needed to play Chester. And then the next one, it depends, of course, whether it's grassy or not. But I do like Vision Gate a lot with Chester, but of course, Damage Kick can really help him out, especially once he starts chaining into those 4 shot sequences. So moving on to the chromatics, starting off with Gale. So Twister is 100% used with him, and then in terms of star powers, depends on whether it's an open map or a closed map. Closed map, Blustery Blow, and then Freeze and Snow can actually be pretty underrated on an open map like Open Zone. But then again, for the most part, I do use Blustery Blow, especially countering those tanks. And then literally every single gear is pretty strong with Gale. With Surge, both gadgets has its uses. If you're playing on a game mode like Brawl and also Heist, then Power Shield is going to be the better gadget. But other game modes I actually like Power Surge, because a lot of times you end up staying at that first level if the opponent is actually clever enough. Serve Ice Cold used 100% of the time. And then depending on a grassy map or not, you'll be switching between the damage, shield, and speed gear. With Colette, there's only one gadget you can use, and that's Gotcha. It really helps you stay alive a lot sooner. Mass Tech is going to be better on game modes like Heist, but also if you're not facing off against a tank. But if you're facing off against a tank or a brawler like Carl, then Push It's going to be really good, because a couple of shots and then your super is going to confirm a kill really quickly. And then again, depending on the game mode and the map, you can switch between any gear. With Lou, it's pretty simple. His second gadget is going to be by far the better gadget, going to allow you to confirm the freeze a lot quicker. And then Hyperthermia as well. Don't really like Super Cool, don't think it has too much value. Supercharge gear is going to be really strong on Lou, so make sure you've got that equipped. And then again, depending on the map or situation, but for the most part, I use the damage gear. Moving on to Ruffs. So again, depending on the matchup, for the most part, I actually use air support because it helps push the enemies back, especially if you're not facing off against a brawler like B or Surge. But if you are facing off against like B, Surge, or Jean, then Take Cover is going to be really good, allowing you to tank a lot of shots, or just any single shot brawler. And then for star powers, air superiority 100% of the time. And then again, depending on the scenario, literally all of these gears are going to be good except for health for Ruffs. With Belle, both gadgets has its use, especially on game modes like Hot Zone. Nest Egg is going to be by far the better gadget. But if you want to, on like Knockout, for example, use Reverse Polarity, can actually be really good in getting pressure or confirming kills. And then Positive Feedback 100% of the time. Reload speed gear 100% of the time, and then really up to you. All of the gears are actually pretty strong on Belle. With Buzz, it's pretty simple. The first gadget every single time, except for maybe on maps like Sneaky Fields, this gadget's actually pretty useful. And then Ice Shot 100% of the time. Definitely needed to play Buzz. And then again, dependent on the map or scenario, but I actually use shield gear pretty much all of the times, and then it depends on whether it's a grassy map, and then I end up switching between one of the 3 gears. With Ash, it's pretty simple. Chill Pill 100% of the time, and then First Bash 100% of the time. I feel like you definitely need both of these to play Ash well. And then most pros, I think 95% of them play with the speed and damage combination, but you can definitely get value out of the health gear as well. With Lola, it's pretty simple. Freeze frame literally every single game. It's really going to help you waste ammo from the enemies. Improvise as well, giving you the additional damage. It's pretty useful. Reload speed gear is just so broken, usable on every single character. And then again, depending on what you really want to do, literally all of these gears are really strong. Next up, we have Fang. So Roundhouse Kick 100% of the time. And then to be honest, I've started to switch up the star powers a lot more. Depends on your playstyle. I still feel Divine Souls is better, but if you're a really good Fang, you can definitely get some good use out of fresh kicks. And then in terms of build, I think that damage and shield is the better combination. With Eve, the best gadget by far is Got to Go. And then in terms of star powers, both of them I don't think are really useful, so it just depends on which one you want. I don't think any of them really actually help out Eve too much. And then in terms of gears, reload speed gear all of the time, and then depending on the map, speed or damage is going to be your best friend. Now moving on to Janet, the best gadget is going to be Drop the Base, especially on those grassy maps. It's going to be so toxic for enemies to deal against. But if you want to play really aggro as a Janet, maybe on like Belle's Rock, for example, or out in the open, it's going to be really good to have this gadget, especially if you're facing off against like a thrower or Swan Squishy. Vocal Warm-Up is going to be the better star power by far. And then on grassy maps, I'll be using the speed and vision combination, but elsewhere, damage and shield is going to be pretty good. So next up for Otis, the best build by far, we have a second gadget which is used all of the time, and then ink refills all of the time, 100% of the time. And then again, really dependent on what scenario you're in. Pretty much all of the time I use supercharge, unless it's a grassy map, then vision gear is going to be really strong combined with the speed gear. So next up, with some magnetic field and hearty recovery, going to be used 100% of the time. And then in terms of gears, speed and damage is going to be the best combination. With buster, it's pretty simple. Slow-mo replay is going to be the best gadget, especially at confirming kills. It really allows you to pull the enemies closer, and of course deal more damage the more close they are to you. And then Kevlar vest is going to be the better star power, just because it makes you immune to knockback, slows, and all that good stuff. And then in terms of his best gears, it's going to be the speed and damage gear. And lastly, for Mandy then, so we have two somewhat useful gadgets. I think Caramelize is definitely the better gadget, especially against those tanky brawlers. It also combines really well with her super. You know, once you slow them down and then use super, you should be able to get a free kill most of the time. Cookie crumbs can actually be pretty good on some knockout maps, maybe, and bounty to confirm kills, but still pretty hard to pull off. And pretty much all of the time, I think in my sights is better. You just hit shots so easy with this star power. And then in terms of gears, really dependent on the map and the mode. Pretty much all of them are useful. All right, guys, gonna be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. So it took a long while to record this one, but I think all of these are really accurate. There are a lot of brawlers right now which don't really have balanced builds, and then there's quite a few that have balanced builds. So hopefully in the near future we'll get some good balances to star powers and whatever else. But in terms of like most of the gears and stuff, I think pretty much all of the gears are really balanced right now. It of course matters on whether it's a grassy map or not. For the most part, the rule of thumb is if it's a grassy map, you're going to be using the speed and vision combination. Elsewhere, you're going to be using any other combination, really up to you, because vision is so strong. One of my favorite gears, and so is speed. So yeah, that's how it is. You know, reload gear is like one of the best gears in the game as well. And then any mythic gear is pretty much really strong, except for the sandy one. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of the other one, which is pretty useless. But yeah, overall, I think these are the best builds. Let me know if I got anything wrong in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.